Moin aus Hamburg. Ich bin Walter Matthias Kunze und es ist Zeit für den Trendtalk, den Daily Trendtalk. Wir haben den 28. April und dieses Mal geht es um die USA. Ich habe mich am Sonntag mit Jana Thompson zusammengesetzt hier per Zoom und Jana hat ein paar Sachen auch vorbereitet, auch eine Präsentation dazu auch, der sie über die Lage in den USA berichtet, und zwar aus ihrer Sicht, aus Sicht auch der Leute in der Region San Francisco. Jana hat lange in Austin gelebt und ist dann nach San Francisco gezogen, arbeitet dort und hat auch eine Tochter und berichtet uns sozusagen aus erster Hand über Berufsthemen, über das Leben allgemein im Rahmen der Corona-Zeit und auch über die sozialen Spannungen, die jetzt gerade in den USA natürlich deutlicher werden. Ich denke, das ist sehenswert, das Gespräch, weil wir doch einen ganz guten und tiefen Einblick bekommen in die Situation. Wir bekommen auch einen tiefen Einblick dahin, wie gespalten die USA wirklich sind. Und zwar nicht nur in zwei Staaten, in dem Sinne von Demokraten und Republikaner, sondern das sind diese 11 Nations sozusagen, und es sind also eine ganze Gruppe von unterschiedlichen Regionen, die sich selbst auch so bezeichnen. Und das ist nicht vergleichbar mit jetzt Bündnissen von Bundesstaaten, Bundesländern in Deutschland. Sie sieht das sehr skeptisch. Ich bin da sehr, sehr gespannt. Ich hoffe, dass auch die USA da gut durch die Corona-Krise durchkommen. Mit ihrem großen Binnenmarkt haben sie natürlich eine gewisse eigene Stärke, sollte man meinen. Ich bin sehr gespannt auf eure Meinung dazu, auch eure Gedanken, denn selbstverständlich ist es so, wenn wir unter den Faktor der Trends uns das angucken, Markttrends, Marktnachfrage und auch weltweite Steuerungen im Bereich Politik und Wirtschaft, dann ist es ganz klar, dass die USA auch massiv das Geschehen weltweit beeinflussen werden. Wenn es ihnen gut geht und wenn es ihnen nicht gut geht, beides hat seine Auswirkungen. In diesem Sinne, auf Englisch, das Gespräch mit Jana. Ich bin sehr gespannt auf euer Feedback, eure Gedanken dazu. Lasst von euch hören. Wenn ihr auch Fragen für euer eigenes Unternehmen habt zu diesen Themen, in denen ihr mehr in die Tiefe gehen möchtet, sagt gerne Bescheid. Jetzt erstmal auf das Gespräch mit Jana Thompson.
Okay. You hear him, huh?
I can hear him.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, ich freue mich jetzt auf das Gespräch mit Jana Thompson und wenn ihr Fragen dazu habt, gerne in den Kommentaren. Also, Jana Thompson, wir kennen uns schon seit einigen Jahren und ich wechsle jetzt auf Englisch. So, here's Jana Thompson. Jana Thompson, you're a design and AI researcher, but I'm happy to have you here and I'm glad to hear about you in your own words. What are you doing? What's your profession?
I do design research and I'm an AI researcher. Currently I'm working on user interfaces for AI projects. I'm an independent consultant here in San Francisco. And I have most recently worked at a design firm, and before that I was in an R&D portion of a large company doing AI development.
Okay, cool. So how's your business? What is the special in your business? So what would you say? What's the current situation there, except Corona, before Corona, I would say?
I mean, honestly, my work hasn't even been impacted by Corona at all. I've been working. I was working at home since I left my last full-time job. So I was working in a shared space, but now I'm just working at home. So that's really the only change. You know, none of us can go to the co-working space right now.
So you mean working in a shared space means we all already work with digital collaboration tools and all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I guess most of my jobs I've had to work remote with and collaborate remotely with people. So I'm used to working at home. Also, you know, being a parent, I often had to stay home with my daughter, so I would have to work remote. And, you know, all of these tools existed to work remote before. Had Zoom.
Yeah, that's the point. If I'm making a comparison to Germany, because we have, Of course, also the knowledge of these digital tools is there in Germany, and people have been working with this, but not many companies haven't been that established. And just now, due to the Corona crisis, companies learned and had to learn to switch to these tools, to use them now, and to do the change in more or less a week. Many of them did this quite fast, did a steep learning curve that way.
I mean,
so that's kind of new.
Yeah, I know several people. I know one person who accepted a job offer like the 10th of March. So just before we went into shelter in place in San Francisco, and he started his job on the 30th. The company FedExed him his laptop, and he did all of his credentials. Like in the United States, when you take a job, you have to show that you're either a citizen or authorized to work.
Okay.
For a large company, and then you have to do all of that verification, and he just did all of that digitally. So you really don't even do that.
Sorry, my baby. Yeah,
that's fine.
He's here. Yeah.
That's also part of life in Corona. Everyone
that's a part of home office. Yeah, Corona.
Child and pets. Yeah. Lots of people have children and pets running in during meetings, and I personally think that's a nice thing. I think the distraction is hard for working, but also I think, I don't know if you've ever read A Pattern Language. It was this book by some Berkeley graduate students and professors in architecture in the 70s.
Okay.
It talks about how work and life should be focused around your local community. The commuting is really a terrible thing to do. Like if you have to commute, like a 20-minute walk, that's fine. It's still part of your community, but it's so common here to have to commute an hour and a half or more in the area. So this is, people are probably being more productive in some ways if they're tech workers anyway, or their jobs can be done remotely. They're probably saving time because they're not having to commute. They're possibly getting more work done, and they're probably not as stressed. Their health is probably way better because of that time they're wasting on the commute is the time they can just go out and take a walk around their neighborhood.
That's a point. It's very interesting because I think also this is something that people in Germany are discovering. They say, okay, we were very reluctant to do this, and just had a call with a guy who will be here in the Trendtalk next week on Monday, and it's a logistics company, big logistics group, and he said, well, one of the top executives or the owner or founder is an older generation, and he always had been quite reluctant to do this, to do even home office. And now, after they had a week or so to work themselves into that, he says, well, it's totally great. I never thought that this would work. And we stick with this, so we keep this kind of free choice of working home office or office. And we're even thinking about reducing office spaces.
Yeah, I spoke to another friend the other night. He works for a large company here, and it's really common at tech companies that suddenly, your technical infrastructure kind of has this blow up in the background. And, your customers never know about it if you're good. And the customers never realized something was going on. But, it took 12 hours to put it together and fix everything, but they did it, and they were all remote. The only people that aren't remote are people who have to go into the physical data centers.
Yeah.
But, you don't need that many people in a physical data center, and they can definitely stay way more than 6 feet apart. So, there's those jobs that most of those jobs can be done remote all the time.
I think since you have the AI research background, I think the Corona crisis and the measures really promote or force automation in many parts.
Yeah, that's been done at Facebook, I believe. So I don't know, it was just like about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Okay.
People started noticing on Facebook that certain posts were getting removed and marked as, offensive or something, and they were, maybe something about like grandma's birthday or something. Right? It was very strange.
Okay. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know about the way the moderation is done for Facebook. It's done by people in office parks all around the world.
Okay.
And I mean, it's content moderation is a really, really awful job. There's a great book by Sarah T. Roberts where she talks about this, and she's a researcher at UCLA. And so the content moderators weren't allowed to work remote because of they didn't want this content on remote computers. So they had switched it all over to AI. I'm taking a stab at that they just switched it over to AI because the content moderators weren't supposed to be going into work. And so, yeah, then suddenly all of social media starts going a little awry because it's done by automation. You know, some of those things in the background on Facebook I know more about because I'm here, and I guess I also know people who do the research and people who work in that space. So, you know, the changes in Facebook, I don't know that content moderation can be done by AI just yet. I mean, part of it is done by AI. Things that aren't flagged, all the content is, you know, sometimes marked off as possibly being offensive. But like the fake news thing now is Facebook is automatically marking some content as fake news. It doesn't remove the content, but it flags it as fake news.
Okay.
And that's, I think, coming out of research in conjunction with the partnership on AI here in San Francisco. So I can, so I've been, it's funny because I guess a few weeks ago I was working with this group on doing design research on COVID, and I remember how, I'll talk about this a little bit in the slides. Remember you were like, oh, this has never happened. Nobody's experienced anything like this. And it really frustrated me because I was like, you know, there have been 2 Ebola epidemics in sub-Saharan Africa in the last 6 years. Like there are people who've experienced this. There are people who've already undergone these traumatic things. I mean, not just epidemics, but, you know, there's the civil war in Syria, you know, the upheaval in South Sudan. There's, you know, much of Mexico has had many problems with cartels and the drug wars in the last 10 years. So there have been lots of societies and places dealing with traumatic events. I guess just a lot of Europeans and a lot of Americans, Canadians, people in China or in Hong Kong, but even in China and Hong Kong and Singapore, you know, they lived through SARS 20 years ago.
Sure.
So I think a lot of the world, other than, you know, Europeans and Americans, especially Americans, this is coming from my point of view, Americans haven't experienced anything incredibly traumatic really in years and years other than September 11th. And really in a physical reality that affected New York City. It didn't in Washington, D.C. It didn't. I was living in Austin in Texas at the time. It physically didn't affect me. There was a bit of, I mean, there was a heightened anxiety and paranoia, but physically my life didn't really change that much. I still went to work and still went to school. So I think Americans have this very myopic view. And it was because of that, I started this book a few months ago. I was in Zurich and I bought this book, which is really quite good. And I finally picked it back up. I'd shoved it aside for various other things I was reading. And I'd opened it up. I opened it up the other day to like exactly where I had left off. I even found, you know, my boarding pass from Switzerland. And it talks about, you know, I just find this such a fascinating book. I opened it up and it starts talking about myopic views of designers and how it's actually very dangerous because when you're, you know, the idea of this book is really to talk about making equitable and socially responsible designs for, you know, buildings, products, whatever. And I think this is actually, I mean, it's, you know, Switzerland is like, it's from Zurich, the capital of good design. And this talks about participation and empowerment in design. So I think it's a great book. I recommend it.
Okay, cool. I'll write this down in the description of the video. So you also, thank you for that. And so you also prepared your presentation, kind of some slides.
I did.
On the current situation.
Yes. Yep. So I will go to We actually put them into the speaker view.
Yeah.
Or the slideshow. There we go. That's what I want to do. And then back to Zoom and share screen. There we go. All right. So you can see the show?
Yeah, great view. Great view. Rainbow over the city.
So I didn't put a title on this, and even though it's in my title page. This was taken just, I think, about 4 or 5 days after we went to shelter in place, maybe 2 weeks, somewhere in March. There had been a big rainstorm, and then there were rainbows over San Francisco, and everyone was still getting used to this new reality. We were all locked in our houses, you know, exploring what that meant. And everyone thought this was like the most hopeful thing we could possibly experience. And I thought that was sort of a magical view about San Francisco.
Yeah.
I've lived in San Francisco for 12 years. Sometimes I get really annoyed, and sometimes, like right now, I really love living here. So, you know, we're the pot at the end of the rainbow, definitely full of gold of some kind. Let's see. So this is about me. I was an artificial intelligence researcher. There was my child many years ago. So this is the timeline in San Francisco. The things outlined in red were things that were happening, but we had no idea until much later this was going on. The first death in the COVID death in the United States was actually on February 6th. Previously, it was believed to be late February in Washington State, but actually the first known COVID death in the United States was February 6th in Santa Clara County, which is where Silicon Valley is, like Mountain View, San Jose. Which means that if you see here, there was already spread in early to mid-January in San Francisco, or not in San Francisco, but in the Bay Area. It was already here before even Wuhan went into lockdown, which is but there's a lot of ties between the Bay Area and China. Travel is very common between them because of business, you know, because of technology ties between, you know, Beijing and Shenzhen, Shanghai, and the Bay Area, and also there's a large population of Asian immigrants who live in the Silicon Valley and Bay Area. You know, they go back and forth to visit family. So, you know, there's common travel between the two places. But, you know, COVID was becoming known, and in February there was ongoing, people were not going to Chinatown and Chinese-owned businesses because of a fear of coronavirus, which is silly.
How about that? Yeah.
And then it turned dark, and there were the first incidents of racially motivated violence started. And then on February 25th, so personally, I was already paranoid. I was in Milan in early February. So I was already worried, and I started, you know, preparing to go into shelter in place in late February. And I was like, everyone thought I was a little nuts, but I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't buying 400 rolls of toilet paper kind of thing, you know. I was just making sure I had the medicine, my medications, my daughter's medications. But I was very surprised on February 25th when our mayor in San Francisco declared a state of emergency, basically to free up funds to prepare, which is why she did it. On March 5th, we had our first confirmed community spread in San Francisco. And then on the 16th of March, schools were closed. On 17th, we were given our shelter-in-place order. That was 6 counties in the Bay Area: San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Alameda, Contra Costa, and Marin. And we were the first place in the United States that went into shelter-in-place. March 20th, the governor gave a statewide order. We had our first death March 25th. And then the shelter-in-place got extended till May. We're still under that one. It's likely to get extended again, we believe. And then businesses started announcing they were closing down permanently. Not all of them, obviously, but some of them started. And where we are now is there have been 22 deaths in San Francisco. 1,500 in California as a whole. We're the largest state in the United States, 40 million people. Per capita, we have not nearly the highest death rate, hopefully because we closed down early. We have very strict guidelines from the governor about when we can reopen. And University of California, San Francisco, our local medical school, has been working on a contact tracing plan so that we could possibly reopen. We're working on plans to reopen. That takes time, you know, and this is what life has been in the Bay Area. We were the first in the country, and really the hero that is a Santa Clara Public Health Commissioner, Sarah Cody. Everyone is crediting London Breed here in San Francisco, and she's great. She did a good job, but really the hero of it was Sarah Cody for noticing what was going on and sounding the alarm in the Bay Area.
Okay.
So I've lived in this, and then there's the rest of America, which I find frightening personally these days. I can't even use a picture of our president. This is a picture of like Baldwin.
Yep. Why can't you use a picture of the president?
I just find it too horrifying. After everything that's happened, I mean, I didn't vote for President Trump. I don't particularly like President Trump. But, you know, he was just kind of a buffoon doing damage, scary damage to things. But in the last 2 months, because of his actions, there are over 50,000 dead Americans. You know, that's more than we've lost in some wars. And I refer to this, everyone in America calls us 6 lost weeks. We knew COVID existed. We knew it was spreading. You know, he shut down travel to China, but, you know, like when I flew back from Italy on February 6th, which was the date of the first COVID death in the Bay Area, you know, there was known COVID cases in Italy. And I got off the plane. Nobody screened my temperature. Nobody gave me a warning to isolate myself for 2 weeks. I did anyway. I mean, not completely, but I mostly stayed at home for 2 weeks because I knew I had been in a place where, you know, coronavirus was known to exist. But we lost 6 weeks. You know, the president was off playing golf. He was not trying to get PPE for our hospitals, not securing ventilators, not, you know, trying to look at contract tracing, not even handing out a sheet of paper to travelers from places in Europe or, you know, other places in Asia, like, you know, Singapore, where it was known to exist, or South Korea, where it was like, you know, you're coming back, please isolate yourself for 2 weeks. There was none of this. There was nothing. And then he and then he starts talking about dangerous drugs like hydroxychloroquine, which is actually not a great drug to take. And it just, everything has been a disaster with this guy, including our like injecting bleach comments last week. So, you know, it's just, it's awful. So I can't even use it. I just have to use the joke picture of him as Alec Baldwin, you know? So, you know, what else has been going on in America? Well, there's the rise of regions. This has been a thing that's been going on. Many people talk about how there's all these growing regional tensions in the United States. The middle image is from a research project, you know, and it talks about how there's 11 American nations today. You know, the left coast is where I am, like the coastal areas of California, Oregon, and Washington, and this extends up into British Columbia and Canada, you know, are very progressive, like, you know, how a bunch of Democratic candidates, a lot of Democratic states, Democratic primaries went for Joe Biden. California went for Bernie Sanders. You know, we have, you know, better health care in these states. We have, you know, trans rights are just part of the norm. So we're this, and you know, there's Greater Appalachia, Deep South, you can see there. Over here on the left is the governors of Oregon, Kate Brown, Washington State, Jay Inslee, and our governor, Gavin Newsom. They have something called the Western States Pact that they announced in early April that said they're going to coordinate reopening as one unit. And like basically we're trying to work somewhat as one unit, because we can't rely on the federal government anymore. The federal government hasn't done anything in this crisis. And so this is not the only pact. If you can see over here, this is something a friend of mine put together, talking about how the GDP of these regions is slowly becoming greater than everything else that's still supporting, like still listening to the federal government. But like there's some states in the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, I don't think Massachusetts, but a couple of others said, okay, we're going to reopen as a unit. And now the Midwest is starting to do the same thing. And it corresponds to these regions like Yankeedom and the greater, like this part of the Midwest.
Yeah.
So, and it corresponds to sort of the three loudest and most vocal governors, which are Cuomo in New York, Pritzker in Illinois, and Newsom in California. And I mean, these are three of the largest and wealthiest states in the country. So there's a lot of us, not listening to the federal government and being on our own is a scary thing. We can't rely on our own government anymore.
I see. Yeah. So would you say, could you make a forecast? Would you say, okay, rise of regions, but maybe we should talk about this in another talk, because that's interesting on behalf of the future forecast of the structure of the United States or the existence.
I think it is. People are starting to talk about it more. There are, terrible disparities in the United States. On the left is a map of New York City. And the places that are hit hardest in New York City are working class neighborhoods of color and actually communities of Jewish Orthodox, because they tend to live in tight quarters, have many children.
Okay.
So those are also hard hit, but it's also these, African American and other, folks of color who live in these neighborhoods. It's because their jobs are not the jobs you can telecommute to, because they're bus drivers, transit workers, grocery store workers, people who are essential, but they're not being given the protection they need. Like they're not being given masks and gloves and sanitizer like they should be having in these times, because they are essential. People need them to work for our, communities to keep working, but we're not protecting them in the ways we should be. Also in the United States, I forgot the figures for New York, but I remember the figures for Louisiana. African Americans make up 30% of the population of Louisiana, but there's 70% of the COVID deaths in Louisiana.
Okay.
And then, it's not just those disparities, but on the right is a picture that's in San Francisco. It's of a homelessness encampment here in SF. And, for the most part, nobody I know has COVID in San Francisco. My neighbor across the hall is a physician. She's exposed to it every day. She works in the ICU at a hospital. But all of our new cases are coming out of homeless shelters and elder care centers. The elderly in this country are put into care centers that have little oversight and little money. And so diseases are breaking out. And this is true worldwide about COVID hitting the elderly. But I think in the US, we have particularly horrible standards for our elderly care facilities. And then homeless shelters in the city are, there's no screens, there's no privacy. People are probably better off in tents right now than actually being in a shelter, because they can give themselves some space of their own. And then there's the trolls. There are these people. The picture on the bottom is from a reporter who's a little horrified that, this picture is being compared to zombies. But these are protesters in Michigan. This is the doors of the state legislature building, I believe. And, they're protesting. They have no masks on. This is like a week ago. They have no masks on. And they're protesting to be let out of their lockdown. And this is so incredibly dangerous. And the people, and the things behind this, they're like all these free, or I forgot what was free or open up, all these different states. There's a ton of internet domains that have been put up around this. And this is a tweet talking about the reopen. Oh, the sites were called the Reopen, like Reopen Minnesota or something. It seems to have some Russian trolls behind it, as you can see from the Cyrillic there. And this is a good source. This is a copy of copy of a tweet from Ben Lorica. He's a excellent data scientist. He used to be head of data, I believe, head of data science at O'Reilly Media here in the Bay Area. So we have right-wing trolls trying to get out these people and stirring up all this weird sentiment. And it's, you know, it's really a focused effort. It's not polls and things have shown that at least 2/3 of Americans are totally okay staying at home for now because we know how awful this virus is. And nobody wants to be New York. What's happened in New York is terrifying. And, you know, that actually isn't all Trump's fault. A friend of mine who I spoke with yesterday, you know, blamed Cuomo and de Blasio, and especially de Blasio, the mayor of New York, for this. And I think that's not enough in New York. And on the personal side, like back in my life, I'm homeschooling my daughter, something I never thought I'd do. And tons of families, you know, every family pretty much in America is having to do this now, homeschool their children. Yeah. And, you know, again, there's disparities. Not every family has access to technology. I do. San Francisco's tried to compensate for that. We have lots of Chromebooks. So we tried to make sure kids can get Chromebooks to continue their educations. Events. This is a birthday party I attended a little over a month, a little less than a month ago. Okay. You know, everything has moved online. And this is in everyone's lives. Everyone's birthday parties, the game nights, workout classes, everything. Like all of my workout classes are now online. And, you know, it works. It gives you some semblance of a normal life to see your friends. At least in SF, everyone's been living in small spaces. This is actually a slide, not mine. This is from someone named B. Cavello, who gave a talk a few weeks ago. I gave a talk with, was talking about, or they were talking about how they live in this very small space with their partner. And, you know, like my space is larger than a lot of people's in San Francisco. And there's just me and my child in here, but it's hard to adjust to these small spaces in places like New York. I had a friend who, his partner got COVID in New York, and they were fortunate enough to have a guest room for her to go into, and then their child got COVID, and my friend, and that one friend actually was very lucky not to either be asymptomatic or not get it. But, you know, if people talk about quarantine, how are you supposed to quarantine in a tiny space? I mean, it's talking about like suburban housing, but at least in San Francisco and New York, people don't live in spaces like that because you just don't. I mean, a studio apartment costs $2,500 in San Francisco. And then the other thing, this isn't happening to me to me, I'm fine financially, but I have many friends who've been laid off. They've lost their jobs, or if they're independent artists, things, they've lost their work. This is an image from the food bank in San Antonio. And you can go online and look up these horrific, scary lines of people at food banks across the country because people have lost their jobs. They've lost their ability to feed their families. And we have no social safety net here in the United States. You know, Canada has promised its citizens and residents it'll protect them. I know countries in Europe have, but we have nothing here. We're getting a $1,200 stimulus check. I mean, I make too much money, and that doesn't bother me, okay, at all. But, you know, if you're like, they're not sending stimulus checks to people, U.S. citizens who are married to immigrants. Married to an immigrant, you know, it was just, and, you know, that doesn't account for the fact that there are also so many people here who are undocumented. They're not getting stimulus checks, even though they pay money into the system. So, you know, the pain of what's going to come out of this frightens me. So what are people doing in the U.S.? I mean, some of this is, I think, worldwide. What are we doing to try and good, bad, or indifferent to cope? This is from Jacksonville, Florida, like 3 days ago. People are going to beaches and not being careful, not a mask to be seen, and no social distancing. So I think we're about to see a horrible, horrible spike in some places like Georgia and Florida. because people aren't social distancing, and that's going to keep spreading the disease. People are trying to find meaning and contribute, I think, in ways. This image on the left is from a project in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where a friend of mine lives. And she and all these other people have been making masks for local, healthcare workers and other, essential workers. They spend hours of their day sewing masks for other people. And these are people who are quilters and like to sew anyway, so they can make these things fast and they're really good at it. This is from San Francisco yesterday. People I remember this, people in Italy were singing from their balconies. People here have been clapping for healthcare workers. The manager of the Fairmont Hotel decided that everyone in San Francisco should sing Tony Bennett's "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" as a tribute. It's totally silly, but it's this very San Francisco specific thing. This is this one woman, if you go on her Pinterest, you can find it. She made this time capsule for children. It's like a set of worksheets for people to for kids to put together a time capsule. Give some context and framing for children, because, adults can make some sense of this, but not everyone can, or children can't. So it's trying to put this together to remember. People are baking bread. This is a lot of these are from images of friends. I remember this New York Times reporter I follow on Twitter was like, I made bread for the first time in my life. And I just thought that was so funny, because everyone's like, I'm baking bread now. People are starting gardens. And again, people are making masks, selling masks. I thought the fashion trends this year would be wide-legged pants and analog watches, but no, actually it's a mask. That's the fashion trend of the year. I think people have noticed how trite corporate speaking is. I mean, this has been a thing that people made fun of for years, but there's a video, I can find it and you could put it in the comments if you want, about making fun of these commercials that have been on television for corporations. But everyone in the US has been receiving these emails from corporations. And this poet put together a poem, the first lines of emails I've received while quarantining. And the first stanza is, in these uncertain times, as we navigate the new normal, are you willing to share your ideas and solutions? As you know, many people are struggling. And if you go through it, it's funny, but it's also really sad. Nobody thinks corporations actually care, or, why are we being so glib in this time of struggle, people dying and suffering and economic struggle.
There has been, I just saw some days ago a video where someone made a video collage of all the TV spots, advertising spots, just relating to that, what you're having here in text, where they kind of put the claims, the phrases in a row by several companies. So just saying, in these uncertain times.
Yes,
and you saw that?
Yes, that's what the video I was talking about. In our unprecedented times.
That's a video. Okay, so okay.
Yeah, and it talks about, and there's just a standard script, right? Right. Company has existed. We've been with you for however many years, and we're all together, and yeah. I know this video.
Then there has been on Instagram has been that video of what's her name, an actor, a comedian. It's on Instagram where she kind of comically repeats and the different rules, how to behave. Go out, don't go out. Go to the hospital in case you're not really sick. If you're really sick, then go to hospital. In case you're too sick, then stay home.
I know.
Heard about that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the video, but I've seen the written thing that friends have shared on social media. Stay at home and do this, but don't do this, but do that. And
right. Yeah.
It's I have to admit, I got really sick in early March. And
Yes.
so actually I've been home a week before we even got our shelter-in-place order. My daughter got out sick.
Yeah.
Because she's asthmatic, I just took her home because I was concerned. And she started showing every symptom of COVID, and then I got sick.
Oh,
and,
sorry.
And then because, there was even, I don't know if it was better then because we have more information now, but it's so much. I called my doctor and they weren't super helpful. So I called a friend who's a doctor, and she was actually very helpful. She's like, I don't know if you have COVID. You might have COVID. You might not have COVID. We have no test. She's like, stay at home. So, I called it Schrodinger's COVID, and I think a lot of people in the United States have had, or worldwide have had, the mild form of COVID, and we have no idea if we've had it or not. So I kept calling it Schrodinger's COVID. You could have had COVID, you could not have had COVID. You have no idea. So this, I was referring to this earlier, that no one's ever gone through this before, and people keep saying this. And, that's not true. This is an image. I took this image from an NPR site. I'm not making money off of any of this. I'm just putting this up.
Okay.
But this was like, they were talking about alternative rituals, because I know at least in Sierra Leone during the Ebola epidemic in 2014, one of the ways the disease got spread very quickly is the funeral rituals, because you washed the body and you prepared it for burial. Typically, like the close female family members would do this. And so, of course, it would spread Ebola. Like, that's how it started spreading by like wildfire. But in societies where there's like a close personal relationship with the body of the deceased to clean it and prepare it for burial, you have to come up with a different ritual. And so some researchers working with these communities in the Congo, came up with the idea of planting a tree as an alternative, which, is, so people have dealt with this before, and there is knowledge that we could draw on to deal with this, but I don't think people are looking at that, and I find that very strange. I'm just uneducated. So this was my longer term. This is, my possible long-term trends. As you pointed out, some of this could be another talk. This is like some meme I found on the internet, a friend posted on social media. Thing that worries me, I don't know if this is short-term or long-term, is that in the U.S., we are already so unstable because of the disparities and the regional tendencies, and a federal government that has been perpetually weakened over the last 38 years, that, I worry that this could be the seeds for long-term instability here. Or just more fuel on the fire, either way. And it could go either way. It could lead to, more progressive government policies, especially in terms of healthcare and a social safety net. We're predicted to have 30% unemployment through part of this. And that's worse than the height of the Great Depression.
Yeah, that's also the forecasts. There are many forecasts that way, and also would say from perspective of us here in Trendtalk, I'd say yes. The risks are high for those areas in the world that are already unstable or are already under tension. We have to be careful how to deal with this. For instance, there are street fights and also in France and in Spain and in Italy, and even plunderings of stores and some markets.
Yeah.
Let's hope that this doesn't spread.
Yeah, and because there have already been such tensions with the far right here, as we can see with this, these trolls, like flaming tensions, dark, and like another reason I couldn't use an image of a president who basically fanned flames of paranoia in a time when, every country, no matter, there's all sorts of discussions you can have about governments, but you know, at a time like this, any responsible national leader should be calling for calm and togetherness.
Okay.
I mean, even if they can't do anything else decently, at least, you know, at least be a statesperson, at least speak responsibly and be a leader. And, you know, even Boris Johnson, who I don't think of as I'm not exactly enthused about, at least he pulled it together enough to do that.
So you're saying this also will continue to split the USA?
Yeah, and I think the U.S. is just, you know, there's no reconciling the points of view. There's no reconciling a point of view of people, of white nationalists in this country. And essentially what split this country, what's made this weakening of the federal government in the last 40 years is essentially white nationalism. It was, the election of Ronald Reagan was really spurred originally, I believe, by the reactions of white Southerners who were upset about integration and civil rights. People like to claim, oh, that's not true. It's, you know, Christianity or something. I mean, maybe partially, but if you look at the places that, you know, have become Republican and more far right in their tendencies, it was originally the places that were like boiling because of segregation. You know, whereas the rest of the country where, you know, I'm not saying there's not racial problems in the rest of the U.S. That's like, that would be a total fantasy to say that's not true in places like New York and California. But in places where civil rights didn't cause, you know, any broiling because it already, you know, had kind of started or become accepted, you know, those places have moved on to actually questions that, you know, our political questions look more like, you know, Europe's or Japan's or Australia's. You know, we've moved on with the rest of the world. But the U.S. as a whole is held back basically by white nationalism at a large scale.
So what's your, you see you have the, also the picture of the kind of farm area also.
So it's just sort of a question about what are people going to do more long term now. You know, personally, I'm not planning on staying in the city anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because, you know, I wonder what the long-term implications of this are for, like, how people choose to live. You know, people have come to cities, like, you know, there's been this whole millennial influx into cities, but actually millennials are starting to move out to the suburbs and the exurbs because of the cost of living, you know, as they've started families. But the one thing about living in a city is, you know, you have no space of your own. I'm actually super envious of my friends with yards right now that I don't have. So I wonder if people could be moving farther apart right now because of the sort of memory of living confined to an apartment or to smaller spaces. You know, are people going to cook at home more because they've discovered, oh, I can just cook at home and it's not that painful? People going to garden more, or, you know, what are going to be the long-term, like, behavioral implications? Like, also the remote work is another possibility. And I think the one thing I haven't touched on that is definitely a longer term worry is mental health. I heard a piece the other day on NPR talking about mental health in Italy, as they're now coming out of the, you know, there's been a lot of traumatic things in Italy. Like, a lot of people have died at home. People have been, because of the emergency services being overwhelmed, people would have their family, like a family member's corpse in their apartment for days before someone.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yes.
So there's that trauma. There's the trauma of isolation.
Yes.
There's the breaking of community bonds. You know, I watch my friends here in America and actually, you know, abroad, in, you know, Japan and Italy, England, France, and you know, people with families seem to be doing okay. But I don't know anyone that's undergoing, like, active domestic violence, and that's another threat. But my friends, so the people I know with families and people around them are doing mostly okay, but they all seem to be reverting to some earlier form of themselves because they have no pressures of social conformity right now. Nobody has any social conformity pressures at the moment. We're all living kind of on our own. So that could be good or bad. Maybe people will be a little happier without those social constraints. But then there's the flip side of that. I have friends who live completely alone. And, sometimes socialization buffers your anxieties and other mental health issues that those people aren't getting right now. And so their mental health is suffering. And that's been true in Italy as well, from what I've heard. People have become suicidal from being stuck by themselves for weeks on end. So, I have definite concerns for the long-term mental health of people around the world who are, this isn't an American problem or an Italian problem. That's a problem globally.
Well, we're social beings. Yeah? We need the connection to our friends, to our families, and to our peers. So, that's definitely something that has to be taken care of. What I think is, though, there are some positive aspects in the outcome of this crisis. And one of the major aspects is, in a positive way, is that people see how essential social workers and healthcare workers and teachers and so on are for the society, because many countries, many nations, many governments during the last years didn't take care so much for these businesses, because they thought, well, they were seen as a kind of, well, we need them, but no. So this is changing. I think this is good.
Yeah, and I think, I do think that's a positive outcome. I mean, in the U.S. in particular, there's been the pushes for $15 minimum wage. And in some places, it's been more successful than others. In California, it's been more successful in San Francisco and Seattle. The left coast, of course, it's been more successful here. But, people are like, oh, why do you want $15? You just bag groceries or something. Well, right now the people who are working in grocery stores are risking their lives so people have food. There was the Instacart strikes a few weeks ago, and they're striking again on Friday because it's May 1st. And, of course, I'm getting everything delivered right now. I don't go to a store.
Okay.
So, but, when I get an Instacart order, I tip very well. I don't tip 20%. I tip over that because, I recognize, this person's out risking their health, so I don't have to. I'm going to give them hazard pay. But what they were actually striking for was masks and sanitizer and gloves.
Sure.
They're striking for basic protection. And in the United States, this perception of the gig worker as, like, oh, it's people's freedom and flexibility. Okay, sure. But because people need good health care. I mean, before this started, people were like, these people still need good health care and a safety net that they didn't have. And now, there's not a lot of the Uber drivers aren't driving people, but now they're doing food delivery. So I'm hoping that what comes out of this is, like you pointed out, not just for healthcare workers and social workers. Those people are completely important and fortunately mission, but the working class people who keep our society actually running.
That's my belief. What I say, future always starts now. It's not starting in 5 years or 10 or 15 years or even farther. The future we want to have is the one we create now. In the now, we start now. And so I think on that part, it's very important to be aware of what's happening now, and also not only to look and focus on the bad things that are happening, but to focus on the things that how they can be mended and how we can create a better future, how we can support those good things that are coming up. And one of these is the awareness for these very essential jobs and workers. Also, I think the way that people stick together, even if they are apart physically, they stick together. There are many initiatives, at least what I'm seeing also from here in Germany, that people build up a kind of new community values or community ethics. It's very interesting. Very good.
I mean, my last slide is actually San Francisco, and it is a hopeful sort of thing. And this was somebody put this on a utility pole somewhere in San Francisco, and someone took a picture of it and shared it on social media. That's where I pulled it from. You know, near San Francisco, we are living through a moment that will shape a generation, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Remember that this city is built on love and inclusiveness. Remember to help your neighbors and be patient with those around you. Remember to pause and appreciate the beauty of the Bay. And remember, even in isolation, we are all in this together. Lots of love. You know, hashtag in place together. And I think there's lots of death and there's lots of devastation. And for those people who are grieving, I think we need to remember that too. We need to remember the people. I was very struck. This is something that makes me angry about the US, but I see it in other places. When Wuhan was the place suffering, the first place that suffered, you know, there was signs towards like, you know, we stand with you, Wuhan, we love you, you're in solidarity. You know, I've seen it some towards Italy, and less with Spain. I don't think Americans are super aware of the fact things were happening, like of all the deaths in Spain, or even the rest of Europe. I think they think all the deaths happened in Italy, even though it's most. No. But you know, just the fact that I think many people are aware that it's like we are all. This is a global thing, and you know we need to grieve with the people and the cities and regions that have been devastated the most, which, you know, Iran and Italy, Spain, now France, New York, Wuhan.
It's in a way a time that that brings people globally together, it connects people globally, and gives the people also a new sense of global community.
Yeah, but also
although there are these lockdowns and
Oh, go ahead. I was I was just going to say that, like, you know, this is a good moment to illustrate that yes, we're a global community, but we're also local. And like, you know, this note is about San Francisco, and you know, people in San Francisco typically really love San Francisco in a particular way, and you know, we pride ourselves on being an inclusive city where everyone is welcome, which is kind of true. We don't actually welcome people with right-wing views very much, but otherwise people are quite welcome. You know, and I think that's not something we always do very well, but you know, I've seen, like you mentioned, like a bunch of mutual aid societies, people forming societies to do, you know, deliveries for people who are at risk, and grocery shopping for, you know, people who are elderly with pre-existing conditions. You know, you know, things like putting stuffed animals in windows so that children who are out walking can have something to hunt and look at. I mean, this can take so many different forms. Here, there have been people who wanted sourdough starters for bread. And, you know, people have been like, for social distancing purposes, they like put them on utility poles and said, you can pick it up here. It's strange, but it happens. And
that's what I'm seeing. There are new ways of helping each other. These ways are, as you say, more local. And this brings the people together. It's very interesting. I'd say very, very thankful for your for having you here, for hearing what you're telling about the US as the current situation is. And I see also that there are several topics we should follow up with. Be the split into what were it? 11 states?
11 American nations, yeah.
Yeah, that's really 11 American nations, and also the topics on the social topics, also the new focus on the essential works, essential jobs, how they are needed. So let's see how we can continue this. And I'm also very curious about the feedback from people here in Germany, because still this daily Trend Talk, the major audience is in Germany. But I'd love to also hear from your side, your people, what they are thinking about this also.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
In the
So,
there you go.
switching the view again.
Yeah. Come back. Come here.
Not working?
Oh, it is working. Resume share. Okay, stop share.
Okay, great.
Done. So.
Okay.
So, das war das Gespräch mit Jana Thompson. Wie seht ihr das? Wie sind eure Gedanken zu dieser Thematik? Wie geht ihr daran? Habt ihr Erfahrungen? Habt ihr Freunde, Kollegen, Familie in den USA? Was sagen die dazu? Für mich nehme ich mit, mein Learning ist, wir müssen wirklich sehr auch über den Tellerrand schauen, wir müssen schauen, wie gehen andere Länder, andere Nationen, andere Menschen, andere Kulturen mit diesen Themen um, mit dem Zeitgeschehen der Krise, der Corona-Krise, als auch der Wirtschaftskrise. Dazu demnächst mehr aus dem Baltikum, aus Frankreich, aus wahrscheinlich Russland, aus Italien und aus Skandinavien. Mehr will ich jetzt nicht verraten. Ich freue mich auf jeden Fall, dass ihr dabei seid. Ich bin nochmal wirklich sehr, sehr dankbar und ich freue mich auch im Namen aller, die daran beteiligt sind hier, dass ihr so viel kommentiert, und zwar nicht nur bei YouTube hier, sondern dass es kommen viele Leute an, die sagen, hey, ich habe den Vorschlag für den und den Sprecher oder die Sprecherin als Gesprächspartner. Ich bin sehr, sehr gespannt, wo es hingeht in der Reise der Gesellschaft, in der Weltgeschichte, gerade vor diesem Hintergrund. Wir werden es begleiten, sowohl bei Trendquest als auch mit unserer Reihe hier, denn der Austausch ist das Allerwichtigste. Das gehört zu uns, zum Leben dazu und natürlich auch zur Demokratie. Morgen geht es darum, dann auch um das Thema Kommunikation. Da spreche ich mit Harry Kratel, ist ein alter Hase aus dem Bereich Werbung, Marketing, Digital Advertising und schauen wir mal, wo das dahin geht. Wenn ihr Fragen habt, wenn ihr Anregungen habt, einfach her damit. Nachricht schreiben, Message schicken, LinkedIn kontaktieren, Website aufrufen, was auch immer. Ich wünsche euch einen wunderschönen 28. April. Es ist Dienstag. Macht was draus. Zukunft fängt immer bei jedem Einzelnen an und wir sehen uns morgen wieder beim Daily Trend Talk.